Good morning. When we left off last week, we drew or modeled these four legs. We changed the bounding box so we'd get the right dimensions in our cut list. And now we're ready to put the aprons and apron joinery in. If you look at these legs a little bit and roam around using the orbit tool, you will notice, as I mentioned in the write-up that preceded this, that nothing is rectilinear, nothing has right angles. It's all parallelograms or trapezoids or some other shape with anything but right angles. This makes adding our aprons a little more difficult. Normally what I would do with legs when adding aprons is I would use the rectangle tool to create a rectangle for the apron on the front surface of the legs, then the push-pull tool to give it thickness and make it a component. Then I'd move it back 1/8 of an inch to set it in and add the joinery using the offset tool and the push-pull tool. Well, it's a little more difficult here because of all the strange and complex angles. So here's how we're going to approach it. We'll start off with the tape measure tool and create a little geometry here. If I use the tape measure tool to select any point along a line other than the end points, I get a line that's parallel to the line that where I chose the point. If I bring it back to that line, touch the line, I get a zero offset parallel line. In other words, I get a line, I get a construction line that extends that line plus and minus infinity. And if I do it to this leg, it should run through the same edge on this leg. And it does. So what I'll do is I'll now use the tape measure tool in the other mode. That is, I will choose an end point, come down along this edge, 6 3/4 inches. Make sure I'm on the edge, type 6.75. And I get a construction point down here. With that, I can take the tape measure tool and create another parallel line running through that construction point. And it will extend to this other leg. And notice that because it's on a point that's on this edge and it's parallel to this edge, that it's also on this face and on this face. So now I can use my line tool. And I've got a face. And normally what I'd do is use the push-pull tool, drag it way back. Notice before I click or type anything in, what's happening here. The way the push-pull tool works is it takes the face I choose and then extrudes that face, extends that face along a line that is perpendicular to the face, or a vector that is perpendicular to the face. But because this face is angled, so is the line that's the vector that's perpendicular to it. And so instead of extending this along the top edge of the legs, it extends it at an angle downward. That's not going to do me a lot of good. I mean, I could type 0.75, and sure enough, I'll get a board with 3/4 of an inch thickness, but look here. It doesn't touch the top. Further, if I look at this from the top view, all seems well. It seems to touch the top, unless I look more carefully with the orbit tool. Notice that it doesn't touch. Same is true on this end. Such is the nature of compound angles. So we're not going to use the push-pull tool. Let's get rid of the push-pull by stepping back. Now we'll go around back and look at things back here. I'm going to use a script I wrote, a Ruby script. It's called Draw Normal. You can't quite see it, I don't think. You'll see the DRA here, but it says Draw Normal. And if I select it, it'll tell me down here to choose a face. I'm going to choose this face. Now it says select a point. And what it'll do when I select a point is it will draw a line perpendicular to this face and running through the point that I choose. Well, I'm going to choose a point along this top edge, the midpoint here. And what I've got now is this line that goes through that midpoint and is perpendicular to this face. So if I use the tape measure tool starting at this point, coming out along this line, make sure I stay on this construction line, type 0.75, I'll get a construction point. If I choose a face and put a face that is parallel to this face, right, and runs us through this guide point here, that will give me a piece of wood that's, or an object here that's 3/4 of an inch thick. Well, the way I'm going to do that is to start off by taking a parallel line to this edge that runs through that guide point. And notice over here that if I take this edge, bring it out to that guide point, I now have a line parallel to this line running through this line. And so it must be that this is where a face that is parallel to this face would intersect this top edge. Knowing that, I can now do the same thing I did to the front, which is to take a line here, go down along here, 6 3/4 inches. That's simply what I did here on that front edge to make that front edge. And now I can get rid of this line. It's served its purpose. It'll only confuse me if I keep it. I can use my line tool now. I'll start at this point, this point, this point, here. When I do that, I should have created a face, and I did. Now, to project that face over on the other side, I'm going to use my tape measure tool again to get parallel lines going through that point and a parallel line going through that point. Now I can go to the other end and again using my line tool hopefully create a face. And I did. Lastly, I'll use my line tool to create 2 more edges. One here and one starting out there. Ending here. Okay. Now I've got what I believe to be the makings of an apron. Let's get rid of our guides. First thing I notice is I've got the wrong color of the surface. These are outside skins, if you will, so I'll triple click, and before making it a component, I'll say reverse faces. Then I'll make it a component. Call it long apron. And before I straighten out the bounding box. The bounding box is much too big. Before I straighten that out, I'm going to examine this very closely to make sure I got what I hoped I would get. It doesn't always work out if you're not careful with the points you select. I'm going to choose the X-ray tool to help me examine this. I'm going to go very closely in and look at all of this. Make sure that everything meets where it's supposed to meet. There are no gaps. It all looks good. Let's see about the other end. Come in here as close as I can. That all looks good. All right. Get rid of the X-ray tool. So I've got my component. By the way, I want this to set in 1/8 of an inch. So what I'll do, I'll choose it here, hold it here, type 1/8. There I go. Now it's setting in 1/8 of an inch. Let's just make sure I didn't create any problems when I did that. Everything looks well behaved. All right, what I'm going to do offline is, well, let me do position this one first of all. What I'll do is using the move copy tool, move this along the green axis, flip along green. You can't see me doing it down here. But I did. And I'll put it into position. That's not the position. There we go. Now I'll move it on green 1/8. There we go. Now it's in place. I'm going to go offline and do the same thing to create the other aprons. I'll be back in a moment. Actually, I won't go offline. I think I got an opportunity here to show you another technique. One of the tenets of SketchUp is to never redraw a component if you don't have to. And this is the case here. I'm going to use the rotate tool as a rotate copy tool and choose this. I have to hit the control key. Rotate it 90 degrees. Now I'll move it. Now, since I splayed these legs the same amount in both planes, you'll notice that I already have this edge of this. So what I can do is that I can explode this part and use this leg to form this edge by using the intersect faces with selection. Let's try that. Intersect faces with selection. Now with a little luck, I can get rid of this. And this. Nope. I don't want to get rid of that, so I'll hit the Control-Shift key to take that out of the picture and take that out of the picture to leave me only this in the picture. And look what I've got. If I examine it real close, looks perfect. So, having done the long aprons first was a pretty good strategic choice because I wouldn't have to try to extend them somehow, but rather just cut them down. Okay, so now I'll select this, triple click, make component. I'll call this the short apron. Move it in. One-eighth of an inch. I'll pick it up with the control key, move it along the red axis, flip along red, I'm going to try and there we go. Oh, I didn't get a face on that edge. Notice that when I did the edit intersect faces. No problem. I can go right into edit component mode now and add that face. Let's just make sure I have a face in the other one. I should, because that's the, there we go. That was the face we started off with. And having corrected this one, I've also corrected this one over here. But now let's move it into place. Move it again. 1/8 of an inch. And we've got everything in place. All right, now we need the joinery. We're going to work on this front apron here first. The easiest way to do this is to get rid of the legs for the moment. I thought I put the legs on a legs layer, but apparently not. So I'll create a legs layer. And we'll put the legs on there. While I'm at it, I'll create an aprons layer. Put the aprons on there. So the easiest way to do this is to get rid of the legs. Let's look at this end of this long apron. I'm going to go into edit component mode. I'm going to use the offset tool. Zoom in here close. Notice the way the offset tool works. If I hover over this surface, it chooses it. If I click, I can bring the edge in. I'm going to bring it in 1/4 of an inch. Notice when I bring it in, essentially what it does, it creates parallel lines on this surface, the one that I chose, parallel to the perimeter of the surface and in the amount I specified, in this case 1/4 of an inch. That's nice because if I now do a push-pull, well, actually I can't do a push-pull. I have the same problem doing push-pull that I had creating the aprons themselves. I'll just show you. Notice it's going up, and eventually, you know, it would actually protrude from the top here. So I can't use that. What I'm going to do is use the trick of the tape measure tool, making parallel lines. Sometimes the tape measure tool doesn't behave correctly. Now what I want to bring the, let me see if I can choose. I choose that face and its perimeter. Use the move tool, Control for copy. Move it out along this edge on that guy right there, 1 inch. Now I'll use the line tool. There I go. I've got my joint, my tenon. Now, I'll leave all the rest to the student. What I'll do is I'll bring the leg in. I'm going to click outside the bounding box. Bring the leg in. Get rid of my guides. I'll bring the leg in and show you how to do the mortise, which there's really no magic to that. Just orbit around here. Put the leg in edit component mode. You can pretty much see what you have to do here. You cannot use the rectangle tool. This all has to be the line tool to do this. But I'll choose that point, that point, that point. These are points on the surface of the leg where the tenon is entering the leg. It should have given me, it did, gave me a surface right there. I can do the same to the back now. Sometimes these are pretty hard to see, so you might want to switch from X-ray to the hidden line or whatever it is. I forget the name of it. And that too should have given me a surface. I'll just check. Whoops, that's not the surface, but I'm pretty sure it's back there. That looks like it. Okay, so now I can go to Edit. I'm sorry, View, Component Edit, Hide Rest of Model. And let me go back to X-ray. I'm going to get rid of that face right there. And now what I have to do is connect a few lines. This is a tough way to create a mortise when the push-pull tool doesn't work. And I'll get rid of X-ray now. Examine what I've got. That looks like a mortise. There we go. All right, now I've got one tenon and one mortise, but of course I should have one over here as well, and I do. The student is left to do the one on this end and do both of these. The other thing we need to do is correct the bounding box on this. Let me get rid of the X-ray tool here. And I suppose one way we can do that is use my tool again. Use the Draw Normal tool. I'll select this face and that point. It gives me a normal to this face. Now I can use the select tool, select this part, say, oh, you can't see it. Say change axis, it's down here, you can't quite see it. And let's see. There we go. Now we got a good bounding box. And I'm going to leave the rest to the student. Okay, that ends this part. I'll clean this up offline so we're ready to pick up where we left off here. You do the same with yours. And I'll see you next Tuesday. Until then, have a good day.